Hello, my Lynn and Things family and friends. Welcome back to the channel, guys. You see the background, you know what time it is. It is Saturday, story time with Lynn. And remember, we are reading the iconic story of Miss Cicely Tyson, guys. So this book has truly been enthralling, and it's so inspirational, and it is so full of so many just wows and ups and downs, and oh my God, and just life, y'all. Miss Tyson truly was a pioneer of her day, and actually many decades, y'all. So we're going to pick back up today. There will be just one chapter, and we are going to chapter 10 because the book is in like two parts. So part 1 ends at chapter 10, and then we'll pick back up next week where it begins at part 2 of the book, or part 2 of her story. And chapter 10 is a little long, so yeah, one chapter is what we're going to cover this evening. And so y'all know what time it is. We have to have our candle of the evening. So tonight I'm going to be burning my gingham candle by Bath and Body Works. Y'all, I really love it. I really like the red gingham that they came out with. Oh my goodness, the red gingham smells so good. I'm not sure if that red gingham came in a candle, but I do like it. So we got our little candle lit, and we're just going to sit it over to the side, guys. Give me 1 second. Okay, guys, so we got our ambiance all set. We have our candle lit. We're cozy on the couch. So I hope that you are comfy and cozy where you are listening to this from, whether you're doing this on your downtime or you're doing this at work and you just kind of doing like an audiobook type thing, or riding in the car and playing a YouTube this video and listening to the story, or you're just having your me time and you just wanted to take the time out to listen to more of this beautiful and amazing book with me. We're going to get started. Like I say, we are on chapter 10, guys. I can't believe it. We're 10 chapters in. So the title of chapter 10 is Center Stage, guys. It's not every day you find yourself seated next to Marilyn Monroe. Such a day arrived for me in 1956, not long after I'd devoted myself to acting. By then, the spectrum had become an afterthought. Once Warren's coffers had run dry halfway through filming, he never could replenish them, even once he'd left skid marks all over Manhattan trying to raise capital. Rather than simmering on that setback, he linked arms with director Harold Young and screenplay writer Charles Gossett for Carob Gold, a maritime movie about a shrimp boat crew that discovers a sunken treasure. Diana Sands, who'd become a dear sister friend to me, was cast in the film. So was I, though not as the lead. I was to play Dottie, wife of a deckhand. Perhaps strangely to some, I felt relieved not to play the principal role. With my career still in its infancy, my preparation had yet to catch up with my passion. By the time Warren connected with Harold and Charles about the script, the inimitable Ethel Waters, the 1920s blues singer who, by that time, had begun lending her artistic deftness to the stage, had already been tapped as Carob's headliner. "Do you even want to be in the film?" Warren asked me, having observed my periodic vacillations between euphoria to be in the industry and murmuring about how ruefully ill-prepared I felt. I kind of shrugged. During one particularly low valley, I'd even threatened to go back to the Red Cross. Wow, guys. What stopped me was the stubbornness passed on to me from a certain Frederica Theodosia Huggins, the woman I was set on rebutting. "Well, what do you want?" Warren pressed, aggravation in his tone. "I want to learn what it's all about," I said, sighing. "I don't know what I'm doing, Warren. I don't understand it. I need to study." Thus began my months-long quest for formal training. Warren persisted in his behalf that my innate gifts would be enough to carry me, that the well of emotion stored up during my childhood, formed by my wail amid strife in my family's East Side home, shaped when I witnessed my mother up for auction on a Bronx sidewalk, was all the training necessary for me to infuse my betrayals with authenticity. It wasn't. Trauma may give rise to intense feeling, but to refine one's artistry, an actor must be taught to channel the unbridled rawness of that emotion, to effectively use it in service of a character's every groan and grimace. Rather than placing me in a course for total beginners, Warren instead sent me to a downtown studio for actors with some experience, albeit limited. The course gave me a migraine. I sat in class wondering, what are these people talking about? How do they know how to gesture, whether to speak, when to emote? I couldn't grasp it. I don't remember the instructor's name, but I do recall becoming friendly with his wife. You know, I told her after class day one, I really don't like this. Why not? She asked. What's the matter? Because I don't understand what's happening, I said. I need someone to explain this whole thing to me. Don't worry, she said, smiling. It'll come. It didn't. Even after I'd stayed on for several more classes, she and Warren kept claiming, counterintuitively to me, that I was lost because I had too much skill. The problem is that you're so far ahead of your classmates, there's nothing for you to learn, Warren says. That assertion made no sense to me. As far as I could see, I had plenty to learn, whether or not he acknowledged it. This is exactly what I told Lee Strasberg on the day I enrolled at the Actors Studio, then the most prestigious theatrical collective in the nation. Lee, who refined and further developed Stanislavski's approach to method acting and introduced it to the West, was training greats such as Anne Bancroft and Jane Fonda. Surely he could guide me through the labyrinth of fusion and give me the basics. Please, I begged. I don't want to be put in class with professionals. I want to start from the beginning. Lee nodded as if he agreed, but he apparently took Warren's word over mine and placed me with the pros. That's how I ended up at an elbow's length away from the blonde and beguiling Marilyn Monroe. Then, fresh off of her run in the blockbuster romantic comedy, The 7-Year Itch. I too had an itch, an instinct to flee the second that I spotted her. Lord in heaven, what am I doing here? Hello, she purred in my direction. That was my first time in class with Marilyn, and it was also my last. I huffed my way out of there and over to Warren's office. When I tell you I want to start at the bottom, I said, I mean the very bottom, not in a class with big stars. Warren, as amused by my tantrums as he was accustomed to them, just laughed. Well, all right, Cicely, he says. Maybe it's time I send you over to Lloyd Richards. I knew the name. Diana had mentioned the distinguished acting coach to me on several occasions. Most notably when I'd fallen into one of the steepest stupors about my inexperience, I'd uttered another empty threat that evening. I was one melancholic episode away from returning to my day job. You know, you really should go down to Paul Mann's Actors Workshop, Diane told me. Lloyd Richards, Paul's business partner there, is supposed to be one of the best. Just try it. And after you go, you find that you still can't make sense of this business, then you can quit. But please give yourself a chance. Paul, an accomplished theater actor who had founded the workshop in 1953, was Caucasian. Lloyd, a renowned African-American actor and director who years later went on to serve as Dean of Yale School of Drama, had created a nurturing environment for black artists. Sidney Poitier had studied with Lloyd, so had Harry Belafonte, Ruby Dee, and Billy D. Williams. That was resume enough for me to get across to that threshold to that school. My initial appointment was with Paul, whose introductory course was required for incoming students. Our meetings began, as such encounters do, with handshakes and smiles and niceties. It ended traumatically. So, Cicely, he said after we had been chatting for a few moments, where do you see yourself going in this industry? As I thought about his question, his gaze traveled down from my eyes to my chest. My heartbeat raced. Paul rose from his desk and walked over and shut the door. I stood, as did every hair on my neck. Well, I stammered on. Before I could continue, Paul, a menacing tower of flesh, thrust himself toward me and began manhandling my breast, attempting to remove my blouse as I shoved him away. "No!" I yelled. "Get off of me!" He tried to jam me against the wall and shove his hand up under my camisole, but I somehow managed to break free. Once I'd pried myself loose, blouse untucked from a skirt, hair scattered in every direction, I grabbed my pocketbook and I fled to the door. As I reached the doorknob, Paul spoke. "Class begins next week," he said in an eerily calm voice, as if he hadn't just attacked me. "You're welcome to come." Without looking at him, I opened the door and disappeared down the hall, holding back tears long enough to make it out of the front door. Once home, I collapsed into sobs on my bed. A week later, at the start of his introductory course, I showed up. Paul had already gathered with his group of students who'd enrolled in it, and when I entered, he stopped speaking and stared at me. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said, incredulousness in his tone. I breathed not a sentence and took a seat. It had never been Paul's name that had been spoken to me. It was Lloyd's, and whatever it was that Lloyd had to offer me, I intended to get it. If that meant enduring Paul's course so I could move on to Lloyd's permanent tutelage, so be it. If that involved swallowing the recollection of his brazen assault, of forgetting what he'd stolen from me in the same manner a passerby once had, if that was the price to be rendered, I stood ready to pay. All these years later, what Paul did to me that day, the way he puts his hands on me, the trauma is emblazoned on my memory. When someone violates you in that way, it does not simply haunt and aggrieve you, it alters the very shape of your soul. And altered I was. Contrary to the mythology surrounding the unflinching nature of African American women, we too experience trauma. Black women, our essence, our emotional intricacies, the indignities we carry in our bones, are the most deeply misunderstood human beings in history. Those who know nothing about us have had the audacity to try to introduce us to ourselves in the unsteady strokes of caricature on stage, in books, and through their distorted reflections of us. The resulting funhouse image, a haphazard depiction sketched beneath the dim light of ignorance, allows ample room for our strength, our rage, and tenacity to stand center stage. But when we dare tiptoe outside of the lines of those typecasts, when we put our full humanity on display, when we threaten the social constructs that keep others in comfortable superiority, we are often dismissed. There is no archetype on file in which a black woman is simultaneously resolute and trembling, fierce and frightened, dominant and receding. My mother, a woman who amid abuse stuffed hope and a way out into the slit of a mattress, is the very face of fortitude. I am an heir to her remarkable grit. However, beneath that tough exterior, I've also inherited my mother's tender femininity, that part of her spirit susceptible to bruising and bleeding. The doleful dosha who sat by the window shelling peanuts, pondering how to carry on. The myth of the strong black woman bears a kernel of truth, but it is only a half seed. The other half is delicate and ailing, all the more so because it has been denied sunlight. On the day that I went back to Paul Mann's school, I was unswerving in my resolve to study with Lloyd. I was also vulnerable, as traumatized by that Paul's behavior as any woman might have been. My decision to return became a defining one, a choice that sent a resounding echo through the decades of my career. After I endured Paul's course, eyes averted, nose in my notebook, I went on to train exclusively with Lloyd, one of two genius coaches who modeled or molded me during those years. I managed to completely avoid Paul, showing up at the studio only when Lloyd was teaching. By the time Lloyd and I connected, I had begun work on Carib, fleeting between New York and Key West, Florida, where the movie was shot. When I returned to the city during breaks and filming, I couldn't get over Lloyd's office to his office fast enough, ready to soak in all he had to teach me about exploring my character's emotional truth, about enhancing my understanding of given circumstances, about making artistic choices commensurate with that awareness. At the school, I got to know Ruby D. She was also in training then. Though alongside my shade of bright green, Ruby and her husband, Ossie Davis, were already deep emerald sages of the stage. Ruby, diminutive yet spirited, was as much a firecracker then as her decades of civil rights crusading, in front of the curtain and beyond it, would reveal her to be. Girl, I tell you, she'd often tell me, if you can be black and live in this world, you can be anything you want to be. Ruby, who by 1956 was nearly 24 stage and film credits into her career, had experienced the humiliations that come along with acting while black, of having nearly every available role be that of a domestic, of loaning her talents to directors who, away from the lights, sneered down at her as genetically and intellectually subpar. During those times, I knew Ruby and the others not as the theatrical giants the world would come to regard them as. I knew them as human beings, first and foremost, grappling with their private insecurities and frights, struggling to breathe air into their characters' lungs. I knew them as waitresses and as dishwashers, as clerks, as survivors, as dreamers, moonlighting their way to some semblance of solvency. The introverted Sidney Poitier, who began work on A Raisin in the Sun in the late 1950s, was also more confident on film than he was before a live audience. When nerves at times got the better of him, such tremors had risen during Sidney's 1946 Broadway debut in La Strada, when his pre-show peak at a packed house sent his teeth to chattering. When he walked out on stage, he forgot his first line and skipped straight to his eighth, but still, his talent shone through. The show was critically panned, yet Sidney received favorable reviews, enough of them to untie his tongue and put a fresh wind at his back. It was Sidney who connected Lloyd and Lorraine Hansberry, the soft-spoken revolutionary who had penned Raisin as a head nod to Langston Hughes' poem, and in memory of her own childhood marred by flagrant prejudice. Sidney had a long-standing pact with his friend and director. While a student at Paul Mann's Actors Workshop, Sidney once said to Lloyd, "If I ever do anything on Broadway, I want you to direct it." So when Lorraine's scintillating script landed in his possession, he knew exactly where to take it. In Lloyd's gifted and nimble hands, and with the prowess of an all-black cast headlined by Sidney as Walter Lee Younger and Ruby Dee as his wife, Ruth, the play lit Broadway ablaze. Even as it reordered theater's playbook before A Raisin, the prevailing wisdom among the industry's power brokers was that white audiences would support an all-black show only if it was a musical, with us shimmying and golfing our way toward an enduring stereotype. The rapturous applause and repeated curtain calls, with Lorraine urged by the roar to take her bow of validation, demonstrated otherwise. Never before, James Baldwin commented of the play, had so much of the truth of black people's lives been seen on stage. And it was Lloyd, God rest his soul, who had in one way or another molded every performer in that trailblazing production. For months before I connected with Lloyd, Warren often asked me, "What are you looking for in a teacher?" I never quite knew how to answer. Once Lloyd and I began training together, I realized I had been looking for a rock, which Lloyd provided. His method acting approach was not substantially different from what I'd become familiar with up to then, but his manner of delivery, the patience with which he illuminated the tenets, the haven he created for actors, he became the Gibraltar that I and countless others stood upon. Had I allowed Paul Mann to short circuit my dream, I might have missed out on the blessing of Lloyd, whose artistic skill was eclipsed only by his kindness. In contrast to his business partner, he was, for me, a torchlight of integrity. In 1984, decades after my experience with Paul, 8 actresses accused him of sexual assault in a civil suit that landed in the state Supreme Court in Manhattan. The scales of justice leaned in the direction of the women. Paul was issued a guilty verdict and ordered to pay his victims. History has recorded him as a celebrated teacher, one who prepared numerous luminaries for the stage. Yet in my book, he will forever be regarded as the man who, along my path toward Providence, hurled a brick, and one I picked up and threw aside. As I dedicated myself to honing my craft, my baby arched her back toward adolescence. When Joan had left for boarding school, she was 10. Her period not yet arrived. Given that my own had shown up when I was just 9 years old, I thought her first sign of womanhood might be imminent. One thing I knew, I could not allow silence to do my teaching for me, as my own mom had. So ahead of her departure, I had pulled Joan close to my bedside, and together we read through a book about menstruation. She listened intently and nodded, but she did not speak until a year later, when she was home on Christmas break. "Mommy," she says to me while we were on our way to the hairdresser, "I got that thing you were told me about." Her lips spread into a smile. I looked over at her. "What thing, darling?" I asked. "You know," she says, "that thing we read about in the book." "Really?" I said, embracing her. "Yes, really," she said. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel like I'd in some way traced over my mother's blunder, her costly restraint, with an improved way forward for Joan. My daughter needn't stumble her way through adolescence, piecing together nature's truths without the benefit of a narrator. At the end of Joan's break, I sent her to school well supplied with all that she needed to care for herself. And yet, I realize now Joan needed far more than that from me. Our separations were gut-wrenching for the both of us, but most especially for her. She longed, as any child would, to linger at my elbow, to be there for the nightly suppers, the homework sessions around the kitchen table, the impromptu mommy-daughter conversations. I will always remember the summer I traveled to Key West to film Carib Gold. Joan, then on break from school, wanted to accompany me on the road. I considered it, of course, yet in my heart, I knew the experience would be wholly unsatisfying for her and might force an even sharper wedge between us. The job of a professional actor, the script memorizing, the dashing to and fro on set, the disappearance into a character's interior world, demands an enormous intensity of focus. Joan might have been there with me in the flesh, but with my head somewhere beyond the heavens, she would have missed me all the more. So I arranged for her to stay with my sister Emily during that break, and it was yet another parting that bowed her head. "Mom, why can't I come back to New York and go to school here?" Joan often asked me, with remorse lodged in my throat. I did not always know what to say to make her understand. Any explanation I gave sounded to Joan like an attempt to regulate her to the sidelines of my world, to prioritize my career over her. Joan viewed our situation the only way she could, through a child's eyes, whereas I observed it under the unsparing light of adult pragmatism. As grievous as our distance was, I was doing what I felt I had to do in order to provide. Provision, in my mind, was that barometer that bested all other gauges, the litmus test by which my parenting will ultimately be measured. Am I able to give Joan everything she requires? Does the life I make possible for her improve upon the one my parents could have offered me? I know now that Joan pined more for my presence than she did my pocketbook. She needed my provision, yes, but decidedly more of the emotional sort, a cheek to cheek coexistence. I did not regret that I chose to earn a living in the manner in which I did, or that I arranged for Joan to attend school in a world miles north of mine. But I do mourn that my child, during the years she hungered to have me close, felt my absence so profoundly. My utmost, well intentioned as it was, fell short of her needs and desires. Joan began her freshman year of high school in the fall of 1956, around the time Carib Gold was released. I rarely view my own work and have watched only a handful of my own films. The gratification for me comes in doing of the work, the creation, the embodying of a character so fully that the audience comes to believe, feel, see, smell, and taste her existence, climb into her reality, understand her humanity as a means for reflecting upon their own. This is where my satisfaction comes from. Once I have played a character, that portrayal no longer belongs to me. It is an offering to those who witness the unveiling. The joy for me comes in the crafting of the gift, the choosing and the nurturing of it, and then in giving it away. Art, in a sense, is the transference of pleasure. And also, once I've poured myself into a performance, I can't do anything more about it, which is why I do not torture myself by viewing it. When an audience views a film, they experience the story on the screen. As an actress, I also recall the moments between the plot line, the occurrences offset. There were the myriad hours I spent tutoring with Lloyd, the trembling lips that brought me over and over to this doorway for help in developing Dottie. There was the weekend while filming in Key West during Christmas, when Warren arranged for us to visit Cuba before Fidel Castro wrestled control from then President Batista. That holiday was the first I'd ever spent away from New York and family, and my scowl was evident of that. In an effort to buoy my spirits, Warren accompanied me from Key West to Havana on a day-long sail. The breeze playing patty cake with my hair, the smell of the sea for a time vanquishing my wistfulness for home. Ashore, we were welcomed by the sounds of Silent Night and Feliz Navidad. Floating between row houses, pigmented in an array of pastel facades, gorgeous as the island was, the 90-degree temperatures failed to put me in the holiday spirit. At my insistence, Warren sent me home for New Year's. Such memories are what flooded to mind when I saw Carib. Piercingly, what I also recall was my child's sadness during my months of filming in Key West. How much we missed one another, how conflicted I often felt about our separation. When Joan finished middle school, I did move her back to the city to live with me for all 4 years of high school. When I needed to travel for work, such as during my time away for Carib, she stayed in Mount Vernon with Emily and Reggie. By then, my sister and her husband had 3 children of their own, Maxine, Reginald, and Verna. Joan's cousins became like siblings to her. Having Joan close slathered consolation on the wound created by our years apart. On weekends, we attended concerts and plays together. One of her favorite memories is the day I took her to see the film Madame Butterfly. And yet, decades would pass before the bruise of our earlier separation received the light and air it needed to begin healing. I ache in reflecting upon it now. I ache that though my choices were planted in the soil of my deep love for her, she nonetheless felt cast aside. I live with that sorrow. It is why, in part, I write so scarcely of her. Joan felt as a child that she had to share me with the world. I give her now, in adulthood, what my heart has always longed to bestow, my undivided focus, along with the full measure of her privacy. The first time I wandered into a Broadway show, I was mesmerized. I was still new at Red Cross then, long before the Gold Watch epiphany. During the holiday season, we office clerks took to the streets, shaking coin-filled tin cans at passerby, hoping to collect donations for the nonprofit. I don't know why, but I was a nervous wreck rattling that darn can. Late one afternoon, I was assigned to raise my ruckus out in front of Martin Beck Theater on 45th Street. The Crucible, Arthur Miller's fictionalized drama of the Salem witch trials, happened to be in the previews there. And at the end of my shift and near the show's last act, I slipped through 3 sets of double doors and into the back of the theater. I've never gotten over what I saw. Lord, what is this? I thought. I had no concept then of a professional stage production. Had never seen or been inside of a playhouse. In my mind's eye, I can still envision it. The eerily darkened amphitheater, the 1690s garb, and the elaborate set, and the light shining down to dance upon the actors' expressions. The row and row of audience members staring ahead in rapt attention. Lynette Carroll is planning to direct a play called Dark the Moon. He told me a few months after Carroll's release. She's staging it at the Y in Harlem, and she's looking for a lead. You would be perfect. I stared at him perplexed. The same look I always give when I'm scrambling to come up with reasons to decline. I can't do any play, I said. I've never been on a stage in my life. Though I knew more about film than about live theater, I glimpsed enough while racing around town with Warren to shows to be frightened I couldn't deliver. Movie filming involves take after take. In theater, there are no do-overs, no second or seventh chances. You either get it right in real time or you flounder and make a laughingstock out of yourself. Warren, accustomed to my waffling, nonetheless insisted that I meet Vanette. Everyone in my circle knew Vanette. Even then, decades before her gospel-infused production of Your Arms Are Too Short to Box with God thundered onto Broadway in 1976. I regarded Vanette as a theater royalty, a black female innovator amid a sea of white male faces. She'd grown up in a well-heeled Jamaican family, with a dentist father who pushed her toward medicine rather than the arts. She obliged him to a point by earning a doctorate in psychology from Columbia University. But her tug toward the stage proved too powerful to overcome. After studying with Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg, she acted for a time, even creating and touring her one-woman show. Yet, amid a paucity of good roles for black actors, she turned toward directing and teaching, joining the faculty of the prestigious High School of Performing Arts in New York. Her production of Dark of the Moon, Warren explained, would be a revival of the 1945 Broadway folk play about a witch boy, John, who yearns to become human after falling in love with a mortal girl, Barbara Allen. Vanette would assemble an all-black cast as part of the Harlem Y's Little Theater program. The dance numbers in the play, set to spirituals, would be choreographed by young Alvin Ailey. Then, also in the middle of creating what would become his signature work, Revelations. Warren jotted down Vanette's phone number and address and handed it to me. Go, see her, he says. She's expecting you. At the time of our appointment later that week, I arrived at Vanette's townhouse at 864 Broadway in Flatiron. What happened next makes me shake my head at my own self. As I entered the 4-story building, I was so nervous to meet the director that I began yelling her name. Vanette Carroll! Vanette! I screamed like a squealing cat. Vanette Carroll! On and on I shouted, one wooden staircase after the next, until I finally reached her doorway at the top. There she stood, tall and elegant, with salsa round eyes, hand on her hip, and half grinning as she searched my face. What's the matter with you, Miss Cicely? She said in her robust voice Nothing, I responded. Well, then why on earth are you screaming? I kind of shrugged and snickered. Because I didn't know where you were, I said. It's a wonder she didn't send my silly tail back down those stairs and right out of that door. I did not audition that day. Vanette and I simply chatted about this play, about that, and about my experience in Carib. About that moment I'd first encountered theater magic in Midtown. At some point, I must have done a script reading for her. I don't recall. But soon after we connected, my misgivings melted away, as they were prone to do in Vanette's affirming presence. Before I knew it, she and Warren had persuaded me to make my theater debut as Barbara Allen. She'd coached me, she promised, and supplemented Lloyd's guidance of me. I agreed, and as little has been the same in my life since. Lloyd and Vanette were both theatrical masters, but they shepherded me in markedly different ways. Whereas Lloyd preferred a minimum effective dose of intervention, Vanette took an interactive approach, one that included homework and built upon my childhood tendency to ask, why? During one of our sessions, Vanette said to me, I want you to observe someone from afar, and then create a backstory for her. People don't come out of nowhere. They have roots. Someone's appearance and demeanor, she reasoned, offers clues to those beginnings, to the whys and the hows of that person's present state. That notion becomes applicable when analyzing a character, when noticing how his or her story may manifest in every tick and sway, every lurch forward. Infusing a portrayal with such layers of truth is an actor's greatest aspiration. I put my own handprint on that assignment by attempting what I've been doing since my earliest years, staring at people's feet. On the train that week, I observed a Jewish woman, immaculately coiffed and manicured with a lavish mink stole draped around her shoulders. I looked down. She had on saddle Oxfords, tattered around the edges, scuffed at the toe, with a bunion the size of a golf ball butting its head against the leather interior, threatening to break free. In that moment, I decided her wealth had to have been acquired. Perhaps she was a refugee who had escaped to the United States, seeking a better life as my parents once had. If she'd been someone born into privilege, no way would she have donned such footwear, or for that matter, even boarded a subway car. I created a whole probable history for this woman based on those shoes, and submitted it to Vanette. Very good, Miss Cicely, says Vanette, using the name she always called me. I beamed. Vanette taught me to learn technique, and then to forget it, and to resurrect it only if it served my portrayal. Technique is important, to the extent that it is undergirded by emotion. I once knew an actress who was a brilliant technician, but her portrayals fell flat. She could create a moment and bring it to fruition, yet as it was apparent, she wasn't feeling anything, and as a result, neither was her audience. Once Vanette gave me the script for Dark of the Moon, it did not leave my hands. I ate with it, bathed with it, slept with it, slow danced to its tune during my every hour, every day. I want you to come for a table reading at the Y, Vanette told me after we'd been studying with one another for a time. I was such a theater rookie that I'd never heard of a table read, a gathering of the cast for a script run-through. On the afternoon I turned up, my fellow actors had already assembled, and I didn't yet know a soul among them. Richard Ward and Isabel Sanford were on the side of the table. Clarence Williams III, Leah Scott, and Louise Stubbs sat on the other. I drew in a breath, clutched my script toward my chest, and took a place next to Roscoe Lee Brown, who had been cast as a preacher. The previous year, he'd made his stage debut in a New York Shakespeare Festival production of Julius Caesar. When my turn came, I picked up the script, held it 3 inches from my face, and began muttering my lines. Roscoe smiled, reached over, and gently pulled my hands down. I returned his grin, but then moved my hands back up, and perched the script on top of my nose again. On and on this went for most of the reading, me burying my fears into the pages, him encouraging me to reveal my face. Finally, near the end of the reading, Roscoe pulled my hands away once more, touched the bottom of my chin, and tilted my head upward. "You're going to be marvelous," he said in his deep baritone. "Just marvelous." I giggled a little bit, partly because I felt awkward, and partly because I hoped God had heard Roscoe. As my stage debut grew closer, Emily told our mother I would star in a play. "Huh? She going up there and make a fool of herself?" Mom said in her thickest accent. Upon hearing this report from Emily, I called my mother and I asked her to come to the show's opening night. At the time, I did not fully understand what compelled me to reach for the phone and dial my mom, particularly amid the gulf of unspoken hurts that had separated our worlds. Yet something in me wanted her there. Acting is in part about laying bare a character's soul, about allowing someone's secret hopes and frailties to be at long last seen. I realize now, in reflecting upon it, that I long simply for my mother to see me. That is all. I needed to know that this left turn that I had taken, this calling that I had followed, was worthy of her acknowledgement. To be seen in this life, truly observed without judgment, is what it feels like to be loved. Whoever else might have shown up at that play, there was no gaze of pride, no measure of applause that would have mattered more to me than that woman's approval. That is why I invited her. And perhaps because she was so stunned to hear from me, my mother immediately agreed to come. On opening night, boy was I a heap of nerves. Before the show, I made sure I knew exactly where my mom and the friend accompanying her would sit, which was at the center of the theater, about 10 rows back from the stage. If I so much as glanced in my mother's direction, if our eyes inadvertently crossed paths as I was performing, that would have been the end of me. Knowing her precise location, I reasoned, it would allow me to avoid her stare. It would not, as I soon discovered, put her on mute. The lights faded and a hush swept the theater. The moment I emerged and took my place on set, I could hear my mom's voice instantly. "Oh my gosh," she said to her friend in what she thought was a whisper. "I assure you it was not. There she is. There's my string bean." The whole way through Act 1, as I attempted to stay focused, I could hear her oohing and ahhing, pointing and this prop and that, and as if creating a soundtrack to go along with the storyline, laughing and drawing in deep breaths with her palm pressed over her heart. It just about drove me crazy. Still, I somehow managed to concentrate. By Act 2, I had even disappeared into my secret kingdom, that magical realm I withdraw to when a character's spirit washes through me. Barbara Allen's words, the sentences and scenes I had rolled around on my tongue for so long, flowed effortlessly from my lips that evening. Acting, like every art form, is meant to be transport its beholders, and the artist is frequently the first to make the journey. On my trip as Barbara Allen, I could speak. I could utter sentiments that I, Cicely Tyson, might never dare express. Revealing her interior world felt like unburdening my own, like emptying my soul. Sorry guys, I thought it stopped. Almost done. On my first theater stage in Harlem, I was a child once more. Feet dangling from a chair, Holy Ghost sweeping through me. It felt like finding a sense of freedom I hadn't known I was in search of. To the very last scene, Mom kept right on talking. After the audience bathed me in warm applause, I eventually found a way to exit where the crowd was filing out. There stood my mother, with her pillbox hat and Sunday pocketbook, beaming as she accepted congratulatory remarks on my behalf. Yes, I always knew, ever since she was a little girl, that she was going to be an actress, she claims. She likes to sing and dance and... Now wait a minute, I thought. This the same mother who put me out of her house. The woman who would not speak to me because I wanted to act. And now she out here telling these barefaced stories to these people. I found it so unbelievable that I stared at her and burst into laughter. All these years later, I'm still shaking my head at her. I think now that my mother's pivot had nothing to do with a shift of her perspective. The devil, as she saw it, lived not just in the details, but also along the boulevards and byways of my business. Her view had not changed in that regard. Still, whether my mother admitted it to me forthrightly, which she did not on that evening, her behavior had rendered her opinion, handed down a verdict of validation. As she'd observed me from her place in the audience, open-mouthed and spellbound, she'd seen me as she could not have before. In that way, you can see a thing only when you pull back from it, when you step away so you can marvel at its entirety. In panning out, she recognized me for the first time, not just as a daughter to be lorded over, but as a vessel bearing a gift. And the Heavenly Father, for reasons then unknown to both of us, had chosen to grace me with the seed of it. And that, guys, is chapter 10. Oh my goodness, I told y'all that was kind of a long one by itself. And so we will be picking up part 2 of her story next week. And if you are new here, because I know I have a lot of new subbies here, thank you so much. If you've seen some of my previous videos, Marina, she kind of helped me and a couple of others out. So I know I've got a lot of new subbies from Marina's channel, and I just want to say thank you for that. And if you're interested in this session or these type of videos, please go back and start at part 1 of this, because this, I believe we are on part 8 maybe now, because I'm trying to do 2 chapters every Saturday. So if you're interested in hearing her story, Cicely Tyson's story, you can go back. I did kind of compile these into a playlist, so you can go to the playlist and start at video 1 and then just go ahead and listen on, because like I said, this might be part 8. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we're on part 8 now, chapter 10. So please go back and watch those back if you would like to. Binge watch them, y'all. It's a very, very interesting book and very interesting story. And I also did want to say I did do a giveaway in my video for, it's titled Empowered Women, Empower Women. It is a hashtag. So if you see that video with the hashtag Empowered Women, Empower Women, if you go check that video out, you are able to enter that giveaway on that video. I'm going to wait maybe a couple more days, and then I'm going to announce my winner for that giveaway. But you must go over to that video and check that out. Thank you guys so much for joining me for another great story time. Until next Saturday, guys. Or next video, but reading will be next Saturday. Bye-bye.